attorney, and I'm also a member of the Jails Action Coalition. The Jails Action Coalition is here to call attention to the death of Jason Echevarria. He was a young man who was in solitary confinement at Rikers Island. He was in crisis and needed medical attention, and the captain, Terrence Pendergrass, refused to have him moved out of the cell. The Bronx District Attorney's Office investigated because it was ruled a homicide by the medical examiner's office. They didn't prosecute anyone. The Department of Correction fired the lower level correction officers, and the captain, who was most responsible, still works at Rikers Island today.
Officer Pendergrass, I think he should have been handcuffed in the jail right there and taken to central booking, and he should be in jail. Solitary confinement, to me, is a torture box. When you put a person in a shoe, you're breaking this person's mental capacity down to zero. He did something that bad, fine, but treat him as a human being, not like an animal. He's got rights in this world.
My name is Five Mualim Ak. I am the Executive Director of the Incarcerated Nation Campaign, which is a grassroots movement to support those incarcerated. Oftentimes, we let the correctional institutions paint this picture that solitary confinement contains the worst of the worst, and like the Hannibal Lecters of the world. But actually, the system itself is the worst of the worst. I spent 12 years incarcerated. 5 of that I did in solitary confinement, but the time at Rikers and also MCC. During my time in solitary confinement, I was tortured. We're talking about sensory deprivation. We're talking about being away from your loved ones and family members, being away from your children. My son missed me his entire life. When I first went to solitary, I was on Rikers, and there was a fight that broke out in the dorm, and they have a thing called pre-hearing detention. So basically, everybody goes to the box. So for about a week or so, you're in this cell for 24 hours a day, isolated with no property, was not allowed to have any visitors. And we're talking about city jail now. We're not talking about people who are convicted of their crimes, just people who are too poor to afford their bail. A friend of the family had sent me a book called Revolutionary Suicide, and that book got me a ticket because I'm not allowed to have materials in. Even though I have no control over who's sending me materials, I was sent to the solitary for having too many pencils, too many postage stamps, for not getting out of the shower fast enough. I got another ticket. I had a ticket for eating an apple. Apple seeds contain arsenic. So somehow 8 and 10 makes 4 for them, you know, and they add that up and you're not supposed to eat the core. So I got a ticket for that. So the next day I was so fearful I didn't eat the apple at all. I didn't want to touch it. So I got another ticket for refusing to eat. You end up spending time just wasting away, sleeping under your bed, trying to turn days into weeks. There's light deprivation. You don't know one day turns into the next. And you have a person who is emotionally damaged, mentally damaged, and then they just give you a bus ticket for $40 cash and then send you on a bus and you're back in. I went from solitary confinement one day to next day 10 million commuters, right at 42nd Street, right off the bus. That reintegration process is like a crash and attack on your senses. So I've been home a little over 2 years. Roughly 2,000 people are released right back into society directly from solitary confinement. You come out of incarceration, you're disenfranchised, you can't vote, you can't get low-income housing, you can't get city housing, you're not allowed on federal housing, you can't get social services, you can't get food stamps, you can't get Medicaid. These are our citizens returning back to the community. We're the financial capital of the world, but guess what? New York State is also the torture capital of the world. We actually torture people and use solitary confinement 4 times over the national average. We have all these prisons and jails, and we need to be an example as to the rest of the country to humanely address the issues.
Interestingly, the corrections officer, Pendergrass, was just indicted. Talk about what happened to this young man in jail, in solitary confinement. What happened with the soap?
Well, what happened was that he was given a highly toxic antiseptic soap ball, which, according to the jail's own regulations, was not supposed to be given to prisoners the way it was. It was supposed to be diluted in gallons of water because it was highly toxic, given straight. The correction officer clearly was insufficiently trained and insufficiently supervised by the administration of the jails. So the officer was also clearly unaware of the implications of the fact that the inmate was mentally ill. So you have a mentally ill man given a highly toxic substance who then swallows it, tells the officers that he is in trouble, that he's in pain and vomiting and sick.
What's in that soap?
It's an antiseptic, which is extremely toxic.
It's
and
a
has to be
special prison soap.
Yes, it was being given because the toilets had overflowed.
And they were in.
Yeah, they were. The inmates were given the job. The inmates were given the job of cleaning up their own cells with this highly toxic substance, which was supposed to be diluted so that it wouldn't harm them. Instead, it was just given to him outright, and then he was ignored after he swallowed it. And of course, this would be excruciatingly painful. It literally was burning off the surface of his tongue and his throat and killing him. And he died.
And this officer Pendergrass said, I'll get concerned when you show me a dead body.
Well, that's what, those are the reports in the paper. I wasn't there, so certainly I can't say, but that is what I have read.
And Dr. James Gilligan, you wrote this report for the City of New York board that oversees the Rikers Island prison where this prisoner died. And we noted he was in a mentally ill section of the prison, of the jail, I should say. And you wrote in your report about how the nation's jails and prisons have become de facto mental hospitals for the past half century. And you say even that the proportion of people in this country who are currently housed in a mental hospital or correctional facility, there's about 95% in correctional institutions and only about 5% in these mental detentions, medical facilities. Can you talk about the situation with the mentally ill and the use of solitary with them in Rikers Islands and prisons around the country?
Well, as you mentioned, the U.S. has criminalized mental illness. We now put the mentally ill, instead of in mental hospitals, we put almost all of them, 95%, in prisons and jails instead, which is the worst possible place for them, even if they're not put in solitary confinement. Solitary confinement alone, even in people with no history of mental illness, can provoke hallucinations, where people start hearing voices or seeing things that aren't there. People can become delusional. They become disoriented to reality and lose touch with reality. They can become suicidal. That's people with no history of mental illness. If you put somebody who's already mentally ill and already struggling with these problems in solitary confinement, it's the worst possible thing you could do for them.
Now, Lance Lowry in Houston, Texas, you represent the Texas prison guards. Talk about the letter that you made public in January.
What we found is the overall use of solitary confinement in Texas was not serving its intended purposes. We went from a couple of hundred lockup cells to over 8,000 at one point. The state has taken measures to reduce the use of solitary. One initiative has been the use of the GRAD program, which is a gang renouncance and disassociation program where gang members are offered a chance to get out of the gangs and go back into general population. Another program that has been successful here in Texas has been our ADSEG pre-release program, our ASP program, which prepares inmates that are in solitary for a number of years to get ready to be released out into the world. Unfortunately, in Texas, we release over 1,200 inmates directly out into the public. If these guys are too dangerous for our prison population, then imagine the public safety concerns when we're releasing them out into our general public.
Lance Lowry, we are talking with a psychiatrist and yourself, who has been a longtime guard in Texas prisons. You have your own laboratory with which to study these practices that you're describing, the impact of the use of solitary. And I wanted to ask you about this, as you say it, perhaps excessive use of solitary in prisons, and how this impacts the guards' behavior, but also the prisoners' behavior and the guards' ability to control their behavior. I believe you've written about this. Can you describe, what this is like as you see it?
Well, when you place somebody in solitary, you lose a lot of management control over that person. There's not much more you can do, and correcting bad behavior at that point is, it's not a positive step. You don't have the steps and the ability to correct negative behavior. Plus, you have the aspects, increased exacerbation of mental health issues. I've seen offenders cut on themselves. go to the point of even rubbing feces on themselves due to the rapid deterioration. There's no sensory stimulation in these cells, and that creates a major problem.
Dr. Gilligan, you're nodding your head.
Yes, this is a nationwide problem. The stories like the ones you just described at Rikers Island, I hear them from all over the country, from Massachusetts, from Arizona, from California. It's just everywhere. We in this country have made the mistake of, after we closed down the mental hospitals in this country, starting in the 1960s, to deinstitutionalize the mentally ill and get them out of big, overcrowded, underserved mental hospitals, we never put in place the community resources, the community residences, the halfway houses, and these small intensive care units, which the original Community Mental Health Act that President Kennedy signed into law required. The country simply closed down the mental hospitals and didn't put anything remotely adequate in their place. As a result, the mentally ill have wound up either homeless, in jails and prisons, or dead, or finally, overwhelming families who aren't prepared and equipped to deal with somebody who is seriously mentally ill.